6 out of the 7 open NFL head coaching spots have now been filled, and it's clear that Ben Johnson was the best hire of the bunch. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the brain, Luke Braun. On today's episode, we're going to talk about who the best fit for the New Orleans Saints head coaching job is, because it's the only one that is still open. But we're going to start with ranking the top hires so far, 6 jobs. I'm going to rank them 1 through 6, and Luke is going to tell me whether he agrees or disagrees with my ranking. Before we get into it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So we have 6 head coaching jobs filled. 1 remains. To me, it is very, very clear that Ben Johnson is the best hire of the bunch so far. And my guy Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears talked about the news.
But I think we all wanted to see how Ben Johnson would handle getting to run the show himself, right? That's kind of the biggest question mark. We've seen he's been a great offensive coordinator, a great play caller before, but the duties of a head coach, a little different, a little more responsibility on his shoulders. And just because you can call some plays really well when Dan Campbell is leading the room doesn't necessarily mean that you can lead the room in the same way. And so the press conference is kind of his first opportunity to not only, answer for himself and try and convince you with his words, but also in his demeanor and in his energy and just the way he carries himself. And I think already we've seen Ben Johnson show you a lot of green flags, a lot of really strong first impressions here that, again, don't guarantee anything, but he keeps passing every test. And so I liked the way that Johnson in particular addressed this idea of like, okay, you've been a good coordinator. How do we know you're going to be a good head coach? And he has some very specific things that he's paying attention to and that he's trying to establish now that he's taking over the Bears' job.
I'm with Lauren. You can't become a good coach because you win the press conference. But man, things could sure go worse, like whatever happened in Jacksonville, and we'll get to that. But I like Ben Johnson as the best hire of this bunch. I love the division familiarity. He's a guy who's going to know what to expect when he takes on his division opponents, and that's been such a problem for the Bears for so long. Obviously, the quarterback position, I think the pairing of Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams together makes it a really, really solid fit, and the Bears don't have the worst roster in the NFL. Like, there is some remaining talent on the team that, if coached properly, they could be, a playoff contender, maybe not contending for the Super Bowl, but I certainly think they should be contending for the playoffs next year. Do you have anybody else as your number 1 best hire?
I got Ben Johnson 3rd.
Oh, okay. What are your concerns then with the Ben Johnson hire?
I have more questions. I'll call them questions versus concerns. So Ben Johnson's offense in Detroit worked because of the way that it utilized timing. It was a pure progression offense. That means you have to be very precise about when you make the decision about who to throw to, right? If you have 3 steps, you have to be off the first read by the end of that 3rd step. And if you do another hitch, you've got to be off the 2nd read by the end of that hitch. It has to time up perfectly. I cannot think of a worse quarterback in the league for that than Caleb Williams. It's just not a fit. So Ben Johnson, I don't think he's an idiot. I think he's going to redesign his offense around Caleb Williams. What can he do there? And what offense we see in Chicago will be absolutely fascinating. Maybe he finds the thing that works, and Shane Waldron couldn't, and Thomas Brown couldn't. Like, maybe he finds the thing that makes that offense more of an NFL offense. I'm actually working on something. I got a Bobby Peters book about the Lions right now that I'm working through and trying to compare to Caleb Williams' skill set and a larger thing because I'm a Vikings guy, about how it'll match up with Brian Flores, who will play twice a year still. But the offense that got him hired is either a bad fit for the quarterback or won't be the thing they run in Jacksonville or in Chicago. That, to me, that leaves the whole thing in mystery. And by the way, like Lauren said, what do we know about him as a leader? What do we know about him as a culture? What do we know?
Those
about
are all
him?
fair concerns.
What's he going to do when a receiver is mad and demanding a trade? How are you going to handle that situation? All of those are big question marks. So to me, this whole thing is shrouded in mystery. He's the hot name. You got the hot name. Congratulations. Chicago's gotten the hot name before.
Yeah, not hand in glove fit, I guess, and that maybe tempers expectations for the offense. But number 2 on my list is Mike Vrabel with the New England Patriots. I think that's the second best hire of the cycle. I think you could argue.
I'm surprised you said that.
Well, Mike Vrabel is the surest thing of all of the coaches that have been hired so far. And I will tell you, though, my one concern with Mike Vrabel is his coaching staff, and he got some big additions this week and Locked On Patriots broke him down.
Pats fans, the old adage says that there is never a dull moment in Foxborough. The past 12 to 16 hours here in Patriots Nation have certainly proven that to be true. Not one, but 2 vacancies on Mike Vrabel's coaching staff have now been filled. Of course, breaking news yesterday that Josh McDaniels will officially become the Patriots offensive coordinator. Wednesday morning was not to be denied. Terrell Williams, a former defensive line coach for the Detroit Lions, will be joining the New England Patriots staff, and he will be once again joining Mike Vrabel, with whom he worked as a Tennessee Titan.
Look, Mike Vrabel is a guy who has shown that he can get wins when he's got proper roster talent. He is a guy who's going to set the culture and build a culture for you. And with a young team in the Patriots, that makes sense. And it's a great storyline. Vrabel back to New England. In my heart, I got to acknowledge that. But again, I am worried about what his downfall was in Tennessee, and that was his hires on his coaching staff. And Josh McDaniels, good season with rookie Mac Jones, but other than that, been a Tom Brady merchant and has flamed out pretty bad. And any chance when he's been away from New England, I think Doug Marrone on the offensive line leaves some to be desired. If you look at his recent stops and what's happened there, I'm just not certain that Mike Vrabel is great at hiring assistants. And I think with his skill set as a coach, it leads to it being a downfall for him. So not a big fan of this hiring cycle in general, in my opinion. That's why I have concerns with Mike Vrabel, but he's still the second best hire.
I actually have him second as well. I like it. It's a stabilizing thing for a team that has fallen into pure chaos. It's weird. Like, the Patriots are still going after the Belichick, like trying to keep the Patriot way. You can tell me more about if that's how Vrabel coaches, or if it is a little bit more about, like, I don't think he's the I'm going to cut you for being late to a meeting kind of guy as much as Belichick was, but you correct me if I'm wrong on that.
He's close.
He's close? Okay. Well,
he's gonna berate you in front of the team. I mean,
then it's a grasp at the glory days. But if you're New England and you were what you were for 20 years, starting from scratch is still scary. This is probably, if this doesn't work, then they go to totally something new, because they're going back to Josh McDaniels and Belichick but younger. And I get it. There's a clear vision that I can see, even if I don't know if it's going to work. Whoever does, I can at least tell, and that's more than you can say for some of these other hires.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. Moving on to number 3, though, I have Aaron Glenn from the New York Jets. Obviously, one of the strong things for the Jets in recent years has been the defense. He should, in theory, be able to continue that as a defensive play caller and a defensive coach. He's not going to be the defensive play caller in New York. He wants to have 2 coordinators who call the plays so he can be that CEO type. I like that from Aaron Glenn, but still, he should develop a good defensive culture there. He's familiar with the New York Jets organization and the media structure and how that can be. So there are some advantages, and he's just a guy who deserved his opportunity after kind of getting the best out of such an injured defense with the Lions and everything he's put together. Where did you have Aaron Glenn on this list? Because you had Mike Vrabel number 2, you had Ben Johnson number 3. Have I still not gotten your number 1 spot yet?
You still haven't. It's a hot take. I have him 5th, and it's mostly because ownership, I feel like, is just not going to stick by this.
Right.
You're going to take a defensively built roster, put a defensive head coach on it. I don't know what the vision is for their offense, for what they do at quarterback, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, or even if it is, what do we do post Aaron Rodgers? I don't see the long-term vision here. I agree with you that Aaron Glenn deserved a shot. He's a great coordinator.
Right.
And he deserved a shot to be a head coach. I think this is one of the worst places for him to have landed, but it's more of a Jets take than it is an Aaron Glenn one.
I'm with you 100% there. To me, this is my ranking is more about my belief in Aaron Glenn, regardless of like what the Jets have to do with it. I just think
we're just prioritizing differently.
But Luke's number one hire still not on the board with my top 3 on the board. It's going to get spicy. We got 3 spots remaining in my rankings. And obviously me and Luke are not on the same page here.
No, we are not.
Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded. Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw for 1 yard for you to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board, selected more for Travis Kelce on receiving yards, probably more for the quarterback's passing yardage. What I love most, fast, safe withdrawals, and when I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. You can check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. And if you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can get a split of 1 million in promo funds. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Luke, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We went through my top 3 hires, and Luke, your number 1 hire still on the board. So I'm wondering.
Keep going.
I'm wondering. I think I have it. I think I have it with my next ranking. I think I have your number 1 pick.
I hope you do. Otherwise, we're going to argue hard.
Okay, great. Number 4 on the list for me after Ben Johnson, number 1, Mike Vrabel, number 2, Aaron Glenn, number 3. And remember, Luke had Ben Johnson, number 3, Mike Vrabel, number 2. My number 4 is Liam Cohen of the Jacksonville Jaguars. There we go. I thought that would be your pick. So what I want to do here is obviously you're going to make the case for Liam Cohen. I will say this. Offensive play caller. You know me, Luke. We've had these arguments before. I love an offensive play caller as the head coach. That's what I would prefer. But as I learned myself with the Titans, the downside of that is sometimes that coach doesn't know how to be a head coach. And they're not quite prepared for that aspect of it. I think hiring a coaching staff is going to be hard for Liam Cohen. I do not like some of the names that have already been popping up for his defensive coordinator position. Also, like you said with the Jets and Aaron Glenn, the organization in Jacksonville, it's just hard to count on them doing the right things ever. So I have some concerns there, but I will say getting the best out of Trevor Lawrence is what they needed to do. And Liam Cohen gives you at least the opportunity to do that. But there are definitely some concerns there with his age, his inexperience as a head coach, his hiring.
Yeah.
I'm worried about those things.
Right. So the concern about not having been a head coach before, right? Well, that's 4 of 6 of these guys. It's kind of an even point. For me, there's 2 things with Liam Cohen that made me put him number 1. One is he has a track record of getting the most out of a quarterback. The vision here is clear, and that's what's important to me. What are you building? You need to have a concrete answer to that. You can't just say, oh, I'm bringing in, a name I think is hot and we're just going to hope everything works out. No, they are building something that will very clearly be centered on Trevor Lawrence and Trevor Lawrence alone. It's different than the Jets. Jets aren't centering this on Aaron Rodgers. That's different than, I think you can make that same point in favor of Ben Johnson in Chicago, right? Very clear. They're centering this on trying to fix the schematic issues that they had, right? And so that's why that's in the top half for me as well. So that having that very clear vision and a track record of getting the most out of Will Levis back in college, getting the most out of Baker Mayfield in Tampa. Okay, that's great. But the thing about the organization is actually what kind of did it for me, because the Jaguars are incredibly dysfunctional, but he already got rid of the dysfunction just by the virtue of the way he went and got hired.
Well,
he got rid of Trent Baalke. So even if this flames out, Jacksonville comes out ahead in this. And you can't say that for any of the other head coaches.
Let me just say this, though.
They're already on house money.
Things were bad in Jacksonville before Trent Baalke showed up too. So I wouldn't say that you 100%.
They got rid of a problem.
The issue,
They got rid of they didn't get rid of every problem. They got rid of a problem.
Yes.
They got rid of a big problem. So even if Liam Cohen is one and done, Jacksonville profits on this. You can't say this about any of the best head coaching hire. We're already in the black.
Right. Fair enough. So for me, Ben Johnson 1, Mike Vrabel 2, Aaron Glenn 3, and then Liam Cohen 5. You have Liam Cohen 1, Mike Vrabel 2, Ben Johnson 3, and then your number 4 spot is still open because you have Aaron Glenn at 5. My 5 spot, I think
you have Cohen at 4, right?
Yes, Cohen is my 4. So my 5 spot and your 4 spot, I think, are the same. And I have
probably
Pete Carroll, Las Vegas Raiders. Is that your 4 spot? Okay.
It is.
That makes a lot of sense. And you know what? My guy and your guy, Hugh, talked about this for the Raiders.
Pete Carroll and John Spytek were very adamant that, one, they've got the best quarterback that's ever done it in Tom Brady to bounce ideas off of, but they also would not leave any stone unturned when it came to finding their quarterback. And even Pete Carroll said, hey, everywhere I've been, I've had a quarterback that's been very successful, whether that's in college or in the NFL. So they're definitely going to address that. They know that they need to address that. And I love the fact that they're going to do everything that they can to make sure that they have that position solidified, but it's not just about the quarterback position. It's about all the different positions on the team. And really, competition was probably my biggest takeaway from the press conference. It's something that I knew going in that was going to be a big-time conversation piece, was competition. But to hear it reiterated by both GM John Spytek and head coach Pete Carroll, I thought was really good. And it's only going to make this Raiders roster that much better.
Okay, so I have it 5 because I think that Pete Carroll can set a culture there. He can build a program. That's what he's always done. It's what he's been known as a program builder. And my God, the Raiders are lost in the wilderness right now. So they just need some sort of stability or something. But the high-end upside here is so limited because Pete Carroll's age, their lack of quarterback, their lack of roster talent. Like, Pete Carroll is a program builder, but like, at his age, how much time does Pete Carroll have to build a program? I hate to be ageist, you know what I mean? But at some point in time, that has to matter. By the time that they turn the Raiders roster around, he's going to be maybe 80. So those are my concerns, even though I appreciate the stability that it can bring in a moment where they couldn't find anybody to coach the team and the roster is in a really bad spot.
Yeah, he's a good ball coach. And I struggled between him and Aaron Glenn. Because I think both of them, good ball coach. And I think both of them are destined for different reasons. Maybe it's their fault, maybe it's their not, to be short-term situations.
Right.
And that's why they're in the bottom. And the reason I ended up putting Pete Carroll above Aaron Glenn is just because of track record. Just because I know he's done it before. And because, we have been talking for 10 years about how Pete Carroll is too old to be a coach, right? And he still is, ask people around him. He's still got the youthful exuberance that makes absolutely no sense.
That's what Q was saying, yeah.
Yeah. So AJ, nothing but a number, man. I still think he can do this for a few years, even if it is, 3 years of going 9-8. Well, that's kind of just what the Raiders need versus, 2 years of more dysfunction and a power struggle. And I don't know if Aaron Glenn's going to be able to handle that. So that's why I made that decision. But I struggled with it. And honestly, I even thought about putting Pete Carroll higher than this because you know what you're getting. And what Q said, even though he's like a defensive minded guy, he's been able to find success with quarterbacks and more success with those quarterbacks than they had elsewhere, either before or after him. The thing about Vegas, you need to find that guy, and that's going to be the biggest problem. The 3 teams I have up top, Jacksonville, New England, Chicago, they all have the guy they think is the guy right now. Yep. Vegas, we are in complete darkness and mystery. You got to figure that out, and if that flames out, then this could be over well before it started. But yeah, I think these top 4 for me, I very much see the world where they work out. Even Aaron Glenn, I wouldn't be super shocked. It's the next guy that I'm not quite sure what we're doing here.
Well, I can tell you one thing, Luke. It's not a good thing for the Dallas Cowboys that we agreed on one spot. There's one spot on this entire list. Well,
That
we
means
both
he's
had
gonna win
Mike
a Super
Vrabel number
Bowl.
2. We both had Mike Vrabel number 2. But
That's true. That's true.
only one other spot where we actually agree, and it's the 6th and final spot in the rankings, and it goes to Brian Schottenheimer, Dallas Cowboys, Locked On Cowboys. Talked about why there are some signs of optimism.
I mean, I think you got to see a good look at exactly, who Brian Schottenheimer is and what kind of leader he is and how he commands the room. I think this is a guy that, there's a reason that we have been speaking in the way we have about the guy the last, few days. And, we have talked a lot about the process of him being hired. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But when we talked about Brian Schottenheimer, we talked about the fact that we felt like he's qualified to do this job. He's qualified. We can talk about whether he's the best candidate or whether he's the kind of candidate the Cowboys need right now. But as far as being an NFL head coach, he commands the room. He understands what he wants to do. He has a vision for the team. He's confident. He has a lot of familiarity with the players in this locker room, as shown by the fact that a bunch of them showed up to this press conference today.
I feel bad for our Locked On Cowboys guys, Marcus and Landon, because they're just absolutely reaching for any positivity at all. This is a disaster. Letting go Mike McCarthy to end up promoting his offensive coordinator that didn't call plays in the first place, it just makes no sense. It may be continuity, but it's bad continuity. To me, Brian Schottenheimer is a substitute teacher. That's what happened. The teacher had a bad accident. She slipped and fell on a smashed pumpkin during Halloween, broke her hip. She's going to be out for the rest of the school year, and we got a full-time sub. He is a full-time substitute teacher, and I fully believe that Brian Schottenheimer will not last more than 18 months as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. This is we made a mistake placeholder move, and the Cowboys
regret for getting rid of McCarthy.
The Cowboys are a lot of things, but they're rarely ever boring, and this is such a boring move. And it's not good boring, it's bad boring.
Yeah, I don't really understand how the Cowboys are trying to sell me that they got better.
What's the vision?
What was the problem with Mike McCarthy that Brian Schottenheimer solves? I haven't heard that answer, and I think if you got Jerry Jones on a podium again to try to answer it, it would just go worse than last time. So, I think you're just going to have to kind of hunker down and hope that this doesn't usher a whole bunch of Dallas's talent out the door.
Yeah, I agree with you there. But with that being said, there is one head coaching spot that is still open. It's the New Orleans Saints. I'm going to remind you guys what my guy Ross Jackson said yesterday about the finalists, and then we got a little bit of an update on the New Orleans Saints head coaching search as well. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Look, taxes was wondering, waiting, worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Luke, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. Do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with my guy Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. We did our rankings of the hires, some disagreements, some agreements in there as well, but there's one spot that's still open. It's the New Orleans Saints, and my guy Ross Jackson, the mastermind, was on the show yesterday and gave us the New Orleans Saints finalists for the job.
The finalists for New Orleans are the only people who have interviewed so far. In person, excuse me. And that would be Anthony Weaver, defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. Yep. Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator and assistant head coach for the New York Jets. interim head coach from last season, from the last 8 games of the year, Darren Rizzi, special teams coach, one of the best special teams coaches in the NFL. Let me give him his flowers. And then the expectation is that the Saints will have interviewed Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator from the Philadelphia Eagles as well. They plan to fly to Philly to get that interview done.
So that is what has happened in the last 24 hours or so. Philly spent hours meeting, or not Philly, but in Philly. The Saints spent hours with Kellen Moore into the late night or into Tuesday morning is what we're hearing about that meeting. You look at the candidates. I just, how do they not go with Kellen Moore? I mean, Anthony Weaver, Mike Kafka, like Darren Rizzi. What are we talking about here? I mean, New Orleans is in a bad spot, but clearly Kellen Moore is interested. I think they have to make that hire.
I see Mike Kafka and Kellen Moore as very similar candidates, as these kind of like hot up and coming young former backup quarterback, OC types with, innovative, like interesting ideas schematically. The idea of the former backup quarterback gives you a little bit of like, okay, this guy at least was in college leading a huddle. It gives you at least that.
Yep.
And I think that's why that's like a popular move, for like a popular kind of pipeline. So I don't know which of those guys you want to pick. I mean, Kafka's been in these conversations for a couple of years now.
I was going to say,
a more serious guy.
He's been interviewed quite a bit over the last 2 years, if I recall, and it's not really been a finalist for most of these jobs. At some point, it's like Eric Bieniemy. It's like at some point, we may not know what's going on behind closed doors, but we got to take the action for what it is.
Must be a bad
don't
interview.
Want anything to do with you.
Yeah, well, and I guess if that's the case, then too, they go through these 3 interviews and then they spend all that time with the other guy. Maybe that is, a pretty serious pursuit, and that's probably an indication that that's the Saints' favorite. I don't know a lot about Anthony Weaver. I can't really speak to him. And with Darren Rizzi, I don't think that what happened with the Saints in the end of the season was that was his job interview, and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
Kellen Moore does feel like he's got to be the odds-on favorite then, if that's the case, right?
Yeah, it would seem he would have to be, in my opinion. So to me, that's the only thing that you could look at. And I try to think about it from this perspective, man. Like, we don't know what these coaches are individually responsible for if they aren't, coordinators of one side of the ball, if they aren't play callers for that side of the ball while being a coordinator, blah, 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 blah. Like, we can't go off of that. I try to look at it from what will energize the fan base, because so much of this business is, getting the football stuff right, but you got to have an energy to your team and some excitement. And the Saints, that's the only avenue that they have, in my opinion, to create some excitement. You're selling wins or you're selling hope, and you're not selling either if you rehire Dan Rizzi or Mike Kafka or whatever. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed for me, your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, and my co-host, the Brain, Luke Braun. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as I tell you every time, stay safe out there.